Welcome to Fiction Flux. Today we are starting a brand new fanfic. What if Female Deku had the star rage quirk and built a massive harem? Let's not waste any time and get started. The first time the stars screamed through her, she was 8 years old. And nobody was ready. Not her mother, who had been watching the news in the next room when the walls shook. Not the neighbors, who felt the pressure change in the air like a storm arriving without clouds. Not the doctor who had told her 3 weeks earlier, with practiced, professional gentleness that made it worse, that she was quirkless. Definitely not quirkless. The ceiling of her bedroom had cracked from one wall to the other, a perfect line, like something had decided the room needed to be bigger and had started making adjustments. Outside her window, the streetlight had bent, just slightly, just enough that every person who walked past it for the next 6 months would feel like something was wrong with the geometry of that corner, without being able to explain what. Izuku Midoriya sat in the middle of her bedroom floor with her hands pressed flat against the carpet and her eyes wide and her entire body trembling. Not from fear, though fear was there, but from something much larger moving through her that had no name yet and no shape yet and no limit she could feel. She looked at her hands. The skin was fine, no burns, no marks, but underneath the ordinary surface of a small girl's hands, something was moving. Something vast and cold and burning at the same time, something that felt like it had been waiting inside her since before she was born, sitting in the dark of her like a star in the dark of space, patient and enormous and ready. It felt like the universe had been hiding inside her. And it had just woken up. She opened her mouth. "Mom," she said. Her voice was perfectly normal. Everything else was not. Her mother appeared in the doorway and looked at the cracked ceiling and the bent streetlight and her daughter on the floor, and she made a sound that was not quite a word, the specific sound of a parent encountering something that exceeds every category of response they have prepared. Izumi looked at her. "I think," Izumi said carefully, "I have a quirk." The specialist they found, after 3 regular doctors, 2 quirk analysts, and 1 consultation with a university research department that had requested, very politely, that they never come back, described it in terms she was still using in her notes about the case years later. She called it star rage. The mechanics, as far as anyone could determine, were this. Izuku Midoriya's body produced and stored a form of stellar energy, the same fundamental force that powered stars, the nuclear fusion energy at the core of suns, compressed and contained in a human body and accessible through will and emotion. At baseline, it was passive, she radiated warmth. She had extraordinary physical resilience. Her presence in a room tended to make the air feel charged, like the moment before lightning. She rarely got sick. She healed faster than she should. The lights in her vicinity brightened slightly when she was happy. Under emotional activation, specifically under intense feeling of any kind, it was something else entirely. The specialist wrote in her notes, "The subject's quirk output is directly proportional to the depth and authenticity of her emotional experience. Superficial feeling produces minimal output. Genuine, fully felt emotion produces output comparable to stellar events. The connection between emotional depth and power output is not metaphorical. It is literal and measurable." She wrote, "This child is not dangerous because she is powerful. She is powerful because she feels everything completely. The danger and the gift are identical." She gave Izumi the notes to keep. Izumi read them at age 9 and understood approximately 60% of the words. She understood all of it. She had always felt everything completely. She had known that about herself since she was old enough to notice that other people did not seem to feel things at the volume she felt them. When she was happy, she was incandescently happy, the kind of happy that made rooms brighter. She knew that now literally, the lights actually responding. When she was sad, she was completely sad. Nothing held back the full weight of it. When she cared about something, she cared about it with everything. She had spent most of her childhood thinking this was a flaw. The specialist's notes were the first time someone had suggested it was the mechanism. She read that page 3 times. Then she put the notes in the front of notebook 1 and started writing. She was 9 years old, and she had a quirk that ran on feeling things completely, and she had a crack in her bedroom ceiling, and a bent streetlight and 26 notebooks to fill before the world understood what she was. She got started. The years between 9 and 15 were the years of learning what she had. Not training exactly, not in the formal sense. Nobody knew how to train what she had. The specialists had theories. The analysts had frameworks. The agencies that eventually sent quiet inquiries when word of a stellar energy type in Yusutafu reached the right databases had protocols. She attended everything they offered and she took notes on all of it, and she went home and did something different. She practiced feeling. That was what the specialist's notes had told her, in the precise language of science. The quirk ran on authentic emotion. which meant the only way to increase output was to increase authenticity, to feel things more completely, to remove the self-protective distance that people built between themselves and their experience of the world, to allow the full volume of what she felt to exist without management. This was, it turned out, the most difficult training she could have been given. Because she was Izuku Midoriya. She was the girl who apologized when other people bumped into her. She was the girl who compressed her feelings into analysis because analysis was safe and feelings were enormous, and she had a quirk that turned enormous feelings into stellar energy, and she had already cracked a ceiling at age 8. She had very good reasons for the self-protective distance. She had to take it down anyway. Notebook 3 was the first one she called an emotional training log. It was also the most difficult thing she had ever written. She wrote about being told she was quirkless before she knew she wasn't, and she let herself feel how much that had hurt without immediately analyzing why. She wrote about Katsuki and the years of being used as a measuring stick, and she let herself feel the complicated thing that was not just the hurt, which was real, but the grief underneath it. The grief of losing someone she had cared about to the version of himself he had chosen to become, and she let that grief exist at full volume. The ceiling cracked again. She wrote about her mother, the specific love she had for her mother, the enormous, almost unbearable love of a child who understood that her mother had sacrificed things she never named and never asked to be acknowledged. She let herself feel that without containing it. Every light in the apartment blew out simultaneously. Her mother appeared in the doorway. "I'm doing emotional training," Izumi said. Her mother looked at the dark apartment. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "outside." She trained outside after that. By 13, she had reasonable control. Not complete. Complete was a goal she had stopped believing was achievable and had reframed as continuous refinement, but functional. She could feel things at full volume and direct the output rather than just producing it. She could choose between the different expressions of stellar energy, the heat output, the gravitational application, the light generation, the raw force of stellar wind that at full emotional output could move buildings. She could also, which she had not found in any specialist's notes, and had discovered entirely by accident, do something else. She could pour it into people. Not destructively. She had discovered this at age 11 when she had been helping her mother carry groceries and had felt a specific quality of care. The love she had for her mother, the desire for her to be okay, the warmth of being useful, and she had been holding a bag, and the warmth had moved through her hands into her mother's, and her mother had stopped walking, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. "What was that?" her mother had said softly. She had felt it too, whatever Izumi had sent through the contact. She had described it later, as feeling like someone put the sun inside my chest for a second. Izumi had written 6 pages about this. She had not found a name for it yet. The analysts didn't have one either. She called it in her own notebooks the warm transfer, the capacity to share stellar energy not as force or heat or light but as feeling, pure distilled transferable warmth. She thought it was the most important thing she had. More important than the force output, more important than the gravitational application, more important than the stellar wind that could move buildings. The ability to make someone feel the sun inside their chest for a moment. She was 13 years old, and she filed that under most important, and underlined it 3 times. She met All Might at 15. Not dramatically, she had been sitting on a rooftop. She did most of her focused training on rooftops now, for reasons of structural safety and minimal civilian proximity, working through a technique refinement when he passed below on patrol. She had recognized him immediately. She had notebooks on him. She had notebooks on everyone. She had called out to him. He had stopped, he had looked up. He had found a girl with green hair and stellar energy sparking very faintly at her fingertips like miniature sunspots looking down at him, with an expression he would describe later as the most specific focused hope he had ever seen. She asked him the question, "Can someone unusual become a hero?" He did not almost say no this time. He looked at what was happening at her fingertips. He looked at her face. He said, "Tell me about your quirk." She told him. She told him all of it, the specialist's notes and the notebooks and the emotional training, and the ceiling and the warm transfer, and the things she had figured out, and the things she hadn't, and the 15 notebooks she had filled working on the problem of herself. He listened to all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. "You don't need one for all," he said. She blinked. She had not considered this. She had been so focused on the question of becoming a hero, through whatever means necessary, that she had not considered the possibility that the means necessary were already in her. "You have a quirk," he said, "that scales with the depth of your feeling, which means the only ceiling on it is the ceiling of what you're capable of feeling." He looked at her directly. What are you capable of feeling? She thought about the ceiling and the streetlight and the blown-out apartment lights and the 14-page grief session that had produced enough stellar wind to strip leaves from trees in a 3-block radius. I'm still finding out, she said honestly. Then, he said, we should help you find out, properly. He became her mentor, not in the one-for-all sense. In the sense that mattered more, the sustained attention of someone who had spent his life being the strongest and could recognize, in this girl, something that had its own kind of strength and deserved to be understood rather than redirected. He trained her in heroism, the thinking of it, the weight of the responsibility, the difference between strength used for protection and strength used for dominance, the specific moral architecture of someone who could genuinely hurt people choosing, every day, not to. She filled 5 more notebooks. She arrived at UA with 20 notebooks, stellar energy crackling faintly at her fingertips when she was excited, and the specific quality of presence that people would spend the entire first year trying to describe and never quite managing. The entrance exam was straightforward. She stood in the testing field and she thought about what she was doing this for. She thought about it genuinely, fully, without analysis or strategy. She thought about all the people who couldn't protect themselves. She thought about her mother. She thought about the specialist who had seen her at 9 years old and written the gift and the danger are identical, and had given her that information like something she had the right to know. She thought about wanting this more than she had ever wanted anything. The stellar energy came up like a sunrise. The first robot went down in 3 seconds, the second in 2. By the time she reached the 0-pointer, the enormous machine that most students ran from, she was running toward it, and the energy around her was bright enough that the staff on the observation deck had to use protective filters on their screens to watch, and she hit it with 17 accumulated notebooks of emotional training behind a single strike. The 0-pointer went down. She rescued 11 students in the aftermath, pouring warm transfers into each of them. Not enough to heal injuries, but enough to stabilize, to reduce the panic, to give them the specific feeling of not being alone that she had learned was sometimes more useful than any physical intervention. She scored highest in rescue points. She was the only student in the exam's recent history to score above the maximum in that category. The staff would discuss her file for 3 days before orientation. She arrived in Class 1A on the first day with her 20 notebooks and stellar energy faintly present at her fingertips, and the specific obliviousness to her own effect on people that would become, over the next 3 years, the defining feature of the most remarkable social ecosystem UA had ever produced. She sat next to Uraraka by coincidence. She introduced herself by accident. She had been writing in her notebook when Ochako said hello, and she looked up with the full focused warmth of someone who was fully present to whoever was in front of them and said her name. Ochako described it later as feeling like the sun came out. She meant it literally. The light in the room had brightened by 7%. The instruments in the support department registered the fluctuation. Nobody mentioned it to the incoming first years. Aizawa noticed on day 1. He noticed the energy fluctuations, small, controlled, but present. He noticed the way the room's emotional temperature changed when she entered it. He noticed, most significantly, the way other students responded to her without appearing to understand why they were responding. The subtle orientation of attention that happened when she spoke. The specific quality of focus that settled in when she looked at you. He called her in after the first week. She sat across from him, and she felt him reading her the way he read every student, with the careful, practiced attention of someone whose job was to understand what people were actually made of underneath the performance of what they presented. She had the specific experience, with Aizawa, of being read by someone good at it. She read him back. Your quirk output, he said, is tied to your emotional state. Specifically to the authenticity and depth of the feeling, she said, not just intensity. Genuine, fully experienced emotion produces proportional output. Performed emotion produces almost nothing. Which means I can't fake it, she said, and I can't suppress it. Both of those produce instability. The only functional approach is to feel everything completely and direct the output. He looked at her. You've been working on this since you were 9, he said. Emotional training logs, she said, 19 notebooks. You have a notebook about feelings. 18 notebooks about feelings, she said, and 2 about stellar energy mechanics, but the mechanics follow from the feelings, so they're really all the same subject. He looked at the ceiling. She waited. You understand, he said, that this is either the most dangerous quirk I've seen in 20 years of teaching or the most heroic one, depending entirely on you. Yes, she said. And you understand the difference. The specialist who first analyzed my quirk when I was 9 wrote something I've thought about every day since, she said. She wrote, "The danger and the gift are identical." He was quiet for a long time. "Extra sessions," he said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'll work on the applications you haven't developed yet." "I have a list," she said. "Of course you do," he said. She was already opening notebook 20. The first year unfolded the way first years do, in the specific combination of trial and revelation and growth that happened when extraordinary people were given extraordinary challenge and told to become more than they currently were. She was in every difficult moment, not because she sought them out, she would never have claimed that, but because her quirk and her nature put her in the center of things. When there was fear in a room, she felt it and responded to it. When someone was struggling, she noticed and moved toward it. When a situation required someone to feel something at full volume and act from that feeling, she was, by design and by nature, that person. The USJ attack came and she was in the middle of it, and she did what she always did. She felt the full weight of the situation, the genuine fear for her classmates, the specific fury at people who had entered a school to hurt children, and the stellar energy came up like a storm, and she used it. Not perfectly, she was 15, but completely. She got everyone out. The aftermath of the USJ changed things in ways she catalogued carefully. The attention from the other students was different. She had always had attention. The stellar energy made her visible in a way she couldn't fully control. But this was the specific attention of people who had been in a genuinely dangerous situation and had been helped by someone and were trying to understand what they felt about that. She understood it from the outside. She had notebooks on it. She understood it from the inside for the first time at the USJ. The specific feeling of being needed, of being the person who made the difference, of looking at 14 people who were okay because she had been there and feeling the full weight of that without diminishing it. She sat on the bus back and she felt it at full volume, and the windows glowed faintly golden for the entire trip. Nobody mentioned it. Everybody noticed. Todoroki noticed at the sports festival. He had noticed before. She was impossible not to notice. The stellar energy was a constant low-level presence that his precise thermal awareness registered before his conscious mind processed it. But at the sports festival, he noticed her. Not the quirks, her. She had been matched against a student from a different class who outclassed her physically, and she had stood in the ring, and she had felt, at full volume and without management or strategy, the complete and authentic desire to win, not for herself, not for ranking, but because she had people watching who she wanted to show something true to. The energy that came up was extraordinary. Not destructive. She was not built for destruction, and her control was too developed to lose it, but visible. The air around her had shimmered, the light bending slightly near her skin, the way it bent near extreme heat even though her temperature was controlled. She had won. And Todoroki, watching from the waiting area, had felt something he had no previous experience of and no framework for. He had watched her feel something completely and act from it completely, and the specific quality of it, the total absence of performance, the entire lack of distance between what she felt and what she did, had produced in him an ache he could not name. He had spent most of his life building distance between what he felt and what he did, his father's training, the specific discipline of being turned into a weapon, the wall. She had no wall. She had never built one. And watching someone exist without the wall he had spent 16 years constructing was one of the most unsettling and compelling things he had ever experienced. He filed it away. He was not ready to examine it yet. He went on to his own match. He thought about her throughout it. Bakugo's recognition was different. Bakugo had known her since they were 4 years old. He had a more complicated relationship with what she was than anyone else at UA, shaped by years of history that he had spent significant effort not examining too carefully. What he could not avoid, after the USJ and the festival and 3 months of watching her in Class 1A, was this: she was extraordinary. Not because of the stellar energy. He had grown up being told he was extraordinary because of his quirk, and he understood better than most that the quirk was not the person. She was extraordinary because she was the same person in every situation. In training and in crisis and at lunch and in the late library hours when she was writing in her notebook and didn't know anyone was watching. The same focus, the same warmth. The same specific quality of someone who treated every single thing as worthy of her complete attention. He had never had someone's complete attention, not without it feeling like something was being taken from him. She gave it without taking anything. He had no framework for this. He trained harder. He told himself it was competitive instinct. He was very good at telling himself things that were only partially true. The third person was not a classmate. His name was Hawks, or rather, Keigo Takami, the pro-hero Hawks, who was 20 and the number 3 hero and who had been assigned as an external observer for UA's second-year program, and had walked into his first observation session and immediately identified the student with stellar energy sparking faintly at her fingertips as the most interesting thing he had encountered in at least 18 months of routine. He had read her file, he had read it 3 times. Stellar energy type, emotional output correlation, advanced control development, 15 years of self-directed training documented in 20 notebooks. The specialist's note about the gift and the danger. He had read her notebooks. She had submitted 2 of them as training documentation. The mechanics notebooks, not the emotional logs, she had kept those for herself, and he had read them in 40 minutes, and then sat for another 20 thinking about what kind of person produced that quality of self-analysis at 15. He had met her at a briefing, one of the external observer sessions where third-party heroes gave feedback to the second years. She had asked him 4 questions in a row without pausing between them. All 4 questions were more incisive than the ones the senior staff had asked him. All 4 assumed a depth of tactical understanding she should not statistically have possessed at her experience level. He had answered all 4 questions, and then he had looked at her with the specific expression he reserved for things that genuinely surprised him, which was an extremely short list. "You've read my mission reports," he said. "The public ones," she said. "Your high-speed engagement technique in the October incident suggested a modified approach to the angular momentum application I've been developing. I had questions." "You're 15, he said. "Yes," she said, "I'll be 16 in July." He had gone back to his office and written 3 pages of notes. He had been back to UA 6 times, since without any formal reason to be there. She noticed on visit 4, she had been focused on other things for visits 1 through 3, which he found simultaneously frustrating and endearing. When she noticed, she had come to find him in the observer's area and asked him directly why he kept returning. He had said, "Training consultation." She had looked at him with the complete, undivided, fully present attention that was her default mode of engaging with anything she found interesting, and he had felt, for reasons he was a professional, and absolutely was not going to examine in the context of a 15-year-old student, that the description training consultation was not entirely accurate. He went back to his office and wrote 4 more pages of notes. He waited. The second year was harder, not because she was less capable, she was more capable, the control developing every month, the emotional training producing a precision in output that the early notebooks had not predicted. Harder because the things she was capable of feeling were larger now. Grief had grown because she had more to lose. Love had grown because she had more to love. The specific terror of caring about people who were in danger with her grew every time they were in danger together. The stakes of feeling everything completely rose with every person who entered her life completely. She wrote about this in Notebook 24. She wrote, "The cost of this quirk is that I cannot protect myself from what I feel. The more I have, the more I can lose. The more I can lose, the more the loss would cost me. The more the cost, the more the energy. It is a system that only goes in one direction." She wrote, "I am choosing more anyway." She underlined it. She wrote, "That is the answer, and it always has been." The moment everything changed, the moment the thing that had been building for 2 years became something she could no longer pretend was anything other than what it was, happened in the spring of her second year. A joint exercise with third years, rescue simulation, collapsed building scenario, maximum civilian count, time pressure, multiple hazard types. She had been partnered with Todoroki on the primary extraction team. Halfway through the scenario, the simulation shifted, a second collapse, cutting off their egress route and separating them from the rest of the team. Just the 2 of them in a simulated collapse with a countdown she could feel in her chest like a second heartbeat. They worked in perfect coordination. She hadn't planned for perfect coordination. It happened, organic and immediate, like a conversation between people who already knew each other's sentences. She felt the building's structural stress points through the stellar energy she was putting into the environment, a secondary application she had been developing, using the energy as a kind of sonar, and called them to Todoroki, and he responded with thermal adjustments that complemented rather than disrupted her own interventions. They got everyone out, with 40 seconds to spare. They stood in the simulated rubble in the sudden quiet of an exercise completed, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and she felt, at full volume and without any warning and with complete authenticity, something she had not felt before. Not a new feeling, that was what she would write later in Notebook 24. Not a new feeling, a feeling she had been having in smaller measures and had been calling something manageable and safe. But here, in the aftermath of doing something extraordinary together, it arrived at full volume, and it was not manageable, and it was not small, and it was not safe. It was stellar. The air around her shimmered. She was aware of it happening. She was aware of the light bending. She was aware of the warmth she was producing and the specific direction it was moving. Toward him. He felt it, of course he felt it. His thermal awareness was precise enough to detect changes in body temperature at several meters distance. He felt the warmth and he looked at her and he saw her face. She looked like someone who had just understood something. He looked like someone who had been waiting for her to understand it. Midoriya, he said. I know, she said. You know? I know, she said. I have, she stopped. She laughed slightly, the surprised laugh of someone encountering something they should have seen coming. I have 24 notebooks and not a single page about this specific thing, and that is, she laughed again, that is information. He looked at her. Something in his face was doing something she needed more than one look to read. She gave it more than one look. You've been running on the same analysis for 2 years, he said quietly. Yes, she said. You notice everything about everyone else. Yes. And you missed this. Completely, she said. How? She thought about it honestly. Because feeling it at full volume would have meant doing something about it, she said, and I didn't know yet if I should. She paused. I think I've been managing this one, keeping it at low output. He looked at the shimmering air around her. Low output, he said. I'm recalibrating, she said. He was quiet for a moment. She held his gaze and felt the warmth moving through her in the specific direction it wanted to go, and she let it. Not the transfer, not a deliberate application, just the passive radiation of a star that had stopped pointing itself away from something. I'm not going anywhere, he said, quietly, with complete sincerity. I've not been going anywhere for 2 years. I know, she said. I noticed. I told myself it was training partnership compatibility. 32 pages, he said. I've heard about those, she said. I have them, he said. You gave them to me in September. That was a training gift, she said. Izumi, he said. She had heard her name from him before, many times, but not like that, not with that specific weight, the weight of someone who had decided to mean what they said and was saying it. She felt it at full volume. The lights in the simulation room went up 30%. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he said. That was how it started, not with drama, not with the explosive declaration or the grand gesture, with 2 people standing in simulated rubble after doing something extraordinary together, and one of them finally allowing what had been true for 2 years to be true out loud. Uraraka found out that evening. She found out because she came to Izumi's room with food, and found the lights 15% brighter than standard and Izumi, sitting on her floor with notebook 24 open, and the specific expression of someone who had just run an internal analysis, and found it considerably more complex than expected. Ochako looked at the lights, she looked at the notebook, she sat down. Tell me everything, she said. She told her everything. Ochako listened to all of it. She nodded in 3 specific places. She said ribbit, I mean right at one point, which meant she had been talking to Tsuyu about this. She said I know at 2 points, which meant she had known before Izumi did, which was not surprising given that Izumi had been the last person in a building to understand something happening in that building. And Hawks, Ochako said when she finished. Izumi looked at her. Hawks keeps coming back to UA, Ochako said. He's been here 6 times. The official reason is thinner every time. Training consultation, Izumi said. Ochako gave her a look. He's 20, Izumi said, and a pro hero. You'll be a pro hero, Ochako said, and time is not a fixed problem. She tilted her head. I'm not saying anything. I'm noting that he keeps coming back. Izumi looked at notebook 24. She thought about the 4 questions in the briefing, and the 3 pages of notes he had apparently taken, and the 6 visits, and the specific quality of his attention when it landed on her. Not the analysis she brought to everything, but something warmer and more patient, the attention of someone who had decided to wait rather than rush. She opened a new page in the notebook. She wrote at the top, things that require more data. She wrote Hawks. She wrote file under long term. The year continued. The configuration around her continued developing in the specific organic way that things developed when nobody was managing them, when the people involved were too focused on the real work of becoming who they were supposed to be to spend energy on strategy or performance. Bakugo had an argument with her in November that was the most honest conversation either of them had ever had. She had said something true about his development, not the training metrics, something more fundamental, and he had pushed back and she had not backed down, and they had been in the gym for an hour and a half, and at the end of it they were both breathing hard and the gym equipment had sustained minor damage from stellar energy output, and he had looked at her with the expression she had been filing under complicated since first year. He had said, "You're the only one who pushes back." She had said, "You're the only one who needs it." He had looked at her for a long time with that expression. He had said, "That's not all I need." She had held his gaze. She had felt at full volume the history of them, the years and the complexity and the growth and the person he had become from the person he had been, and she had not looked away from any of it. She had said, "I know." He had nodded, once, the specific Bakugo nod that communicated something large in the minimum possible gesture. She had written 12 pages about it. Hawks came to UA for the 7th time in December, this time with a formal request, a speaking engagement, a briefing on high-speed rescue technique for the second years. The scheduling happened to place him in her training slot. She had looked at the schedule. She had looked at the specific arrangement of the timing. She had written in Notebook 24, "This is not a coincidence. He is smart enough to arrange things. I am smart enough to notice. The fact that I am not doing anything about noticing is its own kind of answer." She had gone to the training slot. He had looked at her when she walked in with the specific expression of someone who had arrived at a situation they had spent time arranging and was now navigating the gap between the arrangement and the reality. She had sat in the front row. She had asked 6 questions this time, all 6 more incisive than the ones the senior staff asked, all 6 requiring him to think rather than recite. After the session, he had found her in the hallway. "You're doing it on purpose," he had said. "The questions," she had said. "You know they're hard." "I know you can answer them," she had said. "I'm interested in the answers." She had looked at him directly with the full present attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. "I'm interested in how you think." He had been very still for a moment. "Midoriya." "I know I'm 16, she had said. "I'm not asking for anything, I'm just," she had found the honest sentence. "I'm being honest about what I'm noticing, because my quirk runs on honesty and I've been trying to be less managed about things that are real." He had looked at her for a long time. "You're going to be remarkable," he had said. "You already are, but you're going to be." He had stopped. He had looked like someone choosing words carefully. "I'll be here when you're ready, however that looks, for whatever it turns out to be." She had felt the warm transfer move in her direction, not from her, from him, the human equivalent of the thing her quirk did, but made entirely of intention and sincerity. She had felt it at full volume. "Okay," she had said. "Okay," he had said. He had gone back to his agency. She had added a second note on the Hawks page of Notebook 24. She had written, "Not long-term, ongoing." The 3rd year. She was 17, and she had 27 notebooks and stellar energy that had reached a development level the specialist's notes at age 9 had not fully anticipated, and a configuration of people around her that she had stopped trying to analyze as anything other than what it was. She had the conversation with herself that she had been approaching since the gym floor in 2nd year, not the conversation she had with Ochako, who had always been the most clear-eyed person in her vicinity, not the conversation she had with each of them separately, which had happened in the specific intimate way that honest conversations happened, carefully, truthfully, with the full volume of what was real. The conversation she had with herself. She sat in the garden that someone had planted in 1st year, and she opened Notebook 27, and she wrote at the top of a new page, "What is this?" She wrote, "It is real. I know it is real because I cannot fake the output, and the output has been consistent and large and increasing for 3 years. Every time I am near any of them, the stellar energy does what it does when I am feeling something completely. It has never been dim around them. It has never been managed. It is always full volume." She wrote, "It is different for each of them. That is the thing I keep coming back to, not the same feeling in different containers. The same quality, full, real, unmanaged, but different. With Shoto, it is the warmth of being known without conditions. With Katsuki, it is the specific electricity of someone who makes you more yourself by refusing to accept less. With Keigo, it is the quality of being a future that someone is already investing in. With Ochako, it is home. With Kendo, it is being met exactly where you are." She wrote, "I have always felt everything at full volume. That is my quirk. That is also who I am. These are not separate things." She wrote, perhaps the only logical conclusion for someone who was built to feel everything completely is that everything she feels is real, all of it, at full volume, in every direction it moves. She looked at that. She wrote, perhaps the specialist was right about more than she knew. The gift and the danger are identical. To feel everything completely is to love in multiple directions simultaneously, and that is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. It is me. She underlined that 3 times. She closed the notebook. The garden was quiet around her. The evening light was doing the thing it did at this hour, the specific warmth that turned everything gold and soft. She sat in it, and she let herself be where she was, and she did not manage any of what she felt. She felt all of it. The stellar energy rose around her in a slow, gentle wave, not a burst, not a spike, not the crisis output or the training output or any of the directed applications, just the passive radiation of a star at rest, warm and present and entirely itself. The lights in the garden brightened softly. The air shimmered slightly. She heard footsteps on the path, and she looked up. Chako, and behind her Todoroki, and behind him Bakugo, hands in his pockets with the specific studied casualness of someone who had been told something was happening and had decided to act like he had already known. And at the edge of the path, having arrived with the quiet precision of a pro-hero who was very good at being in the right place, Hawks in civilian clothes, with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the observer expression, not the assessment expression, the expression of someone who had stopped waiting. She looked at all of them. The stellar energy around her rose another degree. The garden lights doubled in brightness. The air was warm and the evening was gold, and she felt, at full volume and without a single managed edge, the complete and authentic and entirely real shape of what her life had become. She laughed. The specific laugh, the real one, the not performed one, the one that happened when something was genuinely wonderful and her body needed to acknowledge it. The garden went briefly, brilliantly, incandescently bright. I was wondering, Ochako said, covering her eyes slightly with one hand, when you were going to stop pretending this needed more analysis. 27th notebook, Izumi said. I was thorough. You were catastrophically oblivious, Bakugo said. That too, she agreed. Todoroki sat beside her on the bench without ceremony. Bakugo settled against the wall behind it with arms crossed, and the specific expression of someone who was exactly where they intended to be. Hawks sat on the other side of her with the ease of someone who had been patient long enough and had decided the patience was done. Ochako sat across from her and looked at the glowing garden with her chin in her hand. Well, she said. Well, Izumi said. She felt all of it. She did not write it down. Some things you do not write down. Some things you live. The stellar energy settled around them like a small warm sun, had decided to rest in the garden for a while. The evening was gold. The stars came out. She looked up at them, the real ones, the vast, cold, beautiful stars that her quirk was named for, and she felt the energy inside her that came from the same source, and she understood, for the first time with complete clarity, what the specialist had been telling her since she was 9 years old. The gift and the danger are identical. To feel everything completely. She was the girl who had always felt everything at full volume and had spent years being told that was too much, too intense, too much to contain, too much to be safe around, too much. And the stars, the real ones, cold and enormous and burning with the specific indifference of things that have been what they are for billions of years and will be what they are for billions more. The stars did not apologize for their light. They burned. That was what stars did. That was what she did. She looked at the people around her in the warm, bright garden, and she felt every single thing she felt about every single one of them at full volume, without management, and without distance, and the stellar energy rose one final degree and held there. Steady, present, warm. Home. She was 17 years old. She had 27 notebooks. She had people she loved completely. She had a quirk that ran on loving completely. The universe, she thought, had been extremely literal about her. She opened notebook 27 one more time. She turned to the last page. She wrote one thing. She wrote, "This is enough." She looked at it. She wrote under it, "This is everything." She closed the notebook. She looked up at the stars. She burned. The garden stayed bright for a long time that night. Not dramatically, not the crisis-level output that cracked ceilings and bent streetlights. Just the warm, steady glow of someone who had stopped pointing their light away from things and was letting it go where it naturally went. She sat in it, they sat in it with her. Nobody said anything for a while. That was the thing she noticed first, that the silence was not uncomfortable. It had the specific quality of a silence that didn't need filling. The quality of people who had been in the same orbit long enough that quiet was just another way of being together. She had written about this kind of silence in Notebook 16. She had been writing about heroism at the time, about the specific companionship of people who had been through difficult things together, and she had noted that the highest form of ease between people was the silence that required nothing. She had not known at 16 that she was writing about this. She knew now. Ochako broke it first, not with words. She stood up and said she was getting food because she had been awake since 5 and had not eaten since lunch, and the garden was beautiful, but she had physical needs, and she looked at Hawks when she said this with the specific expression she reserved for people who had shown up at UA without a formal reason for the 7th time. Hawks looked back with the expression of someone who had been assessed and found acceptable. "I'll help," he said. They left together, which left her in the garden with Todoroki and Bakugo, which was its own kind of room. She looked at Todoroki first. He was watching the stars. He did that sometimes, the specific stillness of someone who found large things easier to sit with than small ones, who was more comfortable with the sky than with most of what happened under it. "I want to say something," she said, "to both of you at once, because I'm done being managed about this." Bakugo, still leaning against the wall, said nothing. He was listening. She had learned to read his listening from the quality of his silence. She turned toward both of them. "I'm not going to pretend this is simple," she said. "It isn't, and I'm not going to pretend I have a clean framework for it because I have 27 notebooks and not one of them has a framework for this specific situation." She paused, "But I know what I feel. I've been training for 9 years to feel things completely and to be honest about what I feel, and what I feel is..." She stopped. She found the words, different for each of you, specific, real. Not the same thing pointed in different directions, different things, each one true. Todoroki turned from the stars. Bakugo uncrossed his arms. "I know that's complicated," she said. "I know it's not conventional. I know that some people would say it should be simpler, that you should have to choose, that this isn't how things are supposed to work. But I have a quirk that runs on authenticity, and every time I've tried to make this simpler than it is, the energy has told me I was lying." She met Todoroki's eyes. "You know I don't lie." "I know," he said quietly. She met Bakugo's. "I know," he said, lower, with the specific weight of someone who had known her the longest and who, of everyone in her life, understood the difference between what she performed and what she meant. She breathed. "I'm not asking either of you to be okay with something you're not okay with," she said. "That's not," she shook her head. "I'm not asking for agreement, I'm asking for honesty from all of us." She looked at both of them, "Because honesty is the only thing I know how to build anything real on." The garden was quiet. Todoroki spoke first. "I told you in the simulation room," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her with the full directness he had been developing, the specific courage of someone learning to let their face say what they meant. "I knew what I was saying. I knew what the situation was. I said it anyway." He paused. "I don't need it to be simple." She looked at him. Something in the stellar energy around her shifted, the specific quality of warmth that moved when she was receiving something real and letting it land completely. She turned to Bakugo. He was looking at the space between his boots, then he looked up. "I've known you since we were 4 years old," he said. "I've been watching you become." He stopped. He started again with the specific deliberateness of someone who had decided to find the true sentence even when the true sentence required him to be more open than he was comfortable being. "I've been watching you become the person you are for 13 years. I'm not going to pretend I don't have feelings about it. I don't do pretend." He met her eyes. "I don't need simple either. Simple would mean something smaller than what this actually is." The garden light doubled. She laughed again, the real one. She couldn't help it. The sheer scale of what she felt was too large for anything smaller than a laugh. 27 notebooks, she said, and the thing I couldn't write about was the most obvious thing. Catastrophically oblivious, Bakugo said again, but the edge was different this time. "Working on it," she said. Ochako and Hawks returned with food from 3 different locations, which meant they had been gone longer than grocery procurement required, which meant they had been talking. She catalogued this. She would ask Ochako about it later. Ochako would tell her some of it and not all of it, and that would be correct because some things were between people and did not require her analysis. She was learning that. Hawks set things down and looked at the garden, at the warm light and the 4 people in it, and his expression was the one she had been building a reading of for 7 months. Not the pro-hero expression. not the assessment expression. The one underneath, the one he didn't show many people, the one that had been showing up gradually and incrementally in the same way he had been showing up gradually and incrementally. "Nice garden," he said. "Someone planted it in first year," she said. "I don't know who." "I do," Ochako said, not looking up from her food. It was Izumi. She was stress processing after the first week and she planted things. She doesn't remember. Izumi looked at her. "You were very intense about it," Ochako said. "You said the school needed more growing things and then you went and made some." She thought about that. She had a vague memory now that it was named. Late September, first year. The specific overwhelm of the first weeks at UA trying to find an outlet that wasn't notebooks or training. She had planted a garden. They were sitting in it. "That's extremely you," Hawk said. "Is it?" "You found a problem," he said. "You addressed the problem. You didn't tell anyone about it." He looked at the plants around them. "You just made more growing things." She thought about that. She thought about 27 notebooks, about the emotional training logs, about 9 years of working in the specific solitary way of someone who was used to being the only person who understood the mechanism of what she was, working alone, making things and not reporting it. She looked at the people in the garden she had made and not remembered making. "I'm going to try something different," she said. "What?" Ochako said. "Telling people," she said. "When I do things, when I figure things out, when something matters." She paused. "I've been working alone for 9 years because it was the only option. It's not the only option anymore." Ochako put down her food and looked at her with the specific expression she used when Izumi said something that confirmed everything. "Finally," she said. The year moved forward in the way that final years moved, with the specific weight of things that were both ending and beginning simultaneously. She was more present than she had ever been. More present because she had stopped managing what she felt, and more present because what she felt was larger than it had ever been, and the stellar energy responded accordingly. She was visible in ways she had not been before. Not just the light fluctuations and the air shimmer and the warmth that people in her vicinity reported noticing. Visible in the sense of being known. She had spent so long directing her attention outward, at everyone else, at their development and their struggles and their extraordinary interiors, that she had not understood what it felt like to turn some of it inward, to let herself be the subject of her own attention. She started a new notebook, Notebook 28. She titled it differently than the others. All the others had practical titles, training mechanics, emotional applications, situational analysis, specific studies. This one she titled simply Me. She wrote in it the way she wrote in the others, completely, honestly, with the full analytical attention she brought to everything. She wrote about what it was like to stop managing. She wrote about the specific experience of allowing herself to feel things at full volume in situations that weren't training, in ordinary moments, in the company of people she cared about, in the garden she had planted and forgotten and returned to. She wrote about the difference between the power the stellar energy gave her and the power of being fully known by someone who chose to stay anyway. She wrote about all of them, each page different because they were different and what she felt was different, and she was done flattening that into something simpler than it was. She wrote about Hawks separately and more carefully, not because what she felt was smaller, but because it was more future than present, more seed than fruit, the specific quality of something that was growing towards something rather than already there. She wrote about the patience he had demonstrated and what it meant to be waited for rather than pursued. She wrote about the specific trust that required. She wrote about Ochako last and longest. She wrote she has been the constant, not because she has been most present, she has not always been most present, but because she has always been true. She has known what this was before I knew. She has kept it for me until I was ready for it. She has never once looked at any part of this with anything other than the full open warmth of someone who genuinely wants me to have what I have. There is a kind of love that is entirely generous, that has no need or demand in it, only wanting the beloved to be fully themselves. That is what she has always given me. That is home. She closed Notebook 28. She started Notebook 29. The final mission of the year was not designed to be the final mission of the year. It was scheduled as a standard third-year practical, a large-scale rescue simulation in a purpose-built facility outside the city, the kind of complex multivariable scenario that the school used to assess third-year readiness for hero licensing. She had prepared for it thoroughly. She had her notebooks and her training and 9 years of emotional precision, and the specific readiness of someone who had been building toward this for so long that readiness had become her default state. What nobody had prepared for was the actual villain. The infiltration was identified 20 minutes into the simulation. Not a staff error, not a student, a genuine threat that had used the controlled situation as cover, a villain with a peculiar and devastating ability that the security sweep had not caught, that had positioned itself inside the exercise and waited. The ability was this: it could absorb stellar energy. She felt it the moment it activated, the specific sensation of something pulling at her output, not a person, not the warm transfer, not any of the directions she had learned to send it. Something taking, something designed specifically to find stellar energy and consume it. She had not encountered this before. She had 8 minutes of pre-briefing notes on it. She had 27 notebooks of everything else. She ran the analysis in real time. The ability was absorbing and storing, building up. The intention, she understood from the output patterns she was reading through the stellar energy she was spreading as environmental sonar, was to accumulate enough to release in a single devastating burst. She had minutes. She found Ochako first, then Todoroki, then Bakugo, who had already identified the threat from a different vector and had been moving toward her. She laid it out in 40 seconds, the threat mechanism, the timeline, the single window she had identified, a 30-second gap in the absorption cycle where the villain would be vulnerable because the stored energy required management and the management required all its focus. "What do you need?" Todoroki said. She had the answer already. It was not the answer she would have given a year ago. A year ago she would have said she needed them to clear the civilians while she handled the threat alone, because alone was the default, because she had been alone in this the longest, and she trusted herself, and the weight of other people's safety was too heavy to share. She said, "I need all of you." She told them what she needed specifically from each of them. She told Todoroki where to be, and what temperature application would create the specific interference pattern she needed. She told Bakugo the trajectory and timing of his support function. She told Ochako the civilian cluster that needed her specific capability at the precise moment the window opened. She told them she was going in directly. Bakugo looked at her with the expression she had catalogued as his version of genuine concern, the one that wore the shape of aggression, because that was the container he had for large feelings, but which she could read correctly now. "Full output," he said. "Full output," she said. He nodded the specific nod. "Don't hold back," he said. "I never hold back anymore," she said. Something moved across his face. "I know," he said, "that's new, it's good." She looked at all of them. The stellar energy rose around her, not the crisis spike, not the uncontrolled burst. The steady full volume output of someone who was feeling exactly what she felt and had no management between her and it. The warmth of them. The specific and irreducible fact of these people having chosen to be here. The specific weight of being worth choosing. She let it be as large as it was. The air around her went from a shimmer to something visible, golden, warm, the specific quality of sunlight distilled into intention. She was not afraid. She moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was the thing that would be played in training footage for years afterward. Not for the power level, though the power level was extraordinary, the full output of 9 years of emotional training, behind a stellar energy application that had no ceiling anyone had found. For the coordination, the specific seamless integration of 5 people who knew each other completely operating in perfect trust. Todoroki's thermal application hit exactly where she had said. The interference pattern formed. Bakugo's timing was exact. She had given him a 3-second window, and he was in the center of it. Ochako's civilian clearance was complete with 40 seconds to spare. The 30-second window opened. She went through it. She did not absorb the villain's stored energy. She was not built for absorption, not built for taking. The warm transfer had always been outward, the stellar energy always a giving rather than a taking. She did something different. She gave it back. She generated at full output, and she aimed it directly at the stored energy, not to overpower, to resonate. The specific frequency of stellar energy meeting stellar energy, each amplifying the other, the way 2 sounds at the same frequency amplified instead of cancelled. She felt the stored energy begin to respond to the resonance, begin to destabilize, begin to want to be released in the direction of its source rather than in the direction the villain intended. She felt the villain lose control of it. She caught it. She held the full combined output, hers and the stored, for exactly the time it took to redirect it. Not at the villain, not destructively, upward, into the sky, away from everyone. The facility's roof sensors registered a brief stellar event. The villain, deprived of its stored energy, and confronted with the full resonant output of something it had been designed to defeat, and had not defeated, ceased operations. She stood in the center of the facility floor in the aftermath. She was breathing hard, Full output held for 4 minutes, and a full resonance redirection was more than any single training session had asked of her. She felt it in every part of her body, the specific comprehensive exhaustion of someone who had emptied themselves completely in the right direction. She was also, she noted, completely intact. No cracks, no blown-out lights, no bent infrastructure. 9 years of control under the most demanding conditions she had ever experienced. She stood in the aftermath, and she felt, at full volume and without management, the specific feeling of having been exactly what the situation required. The others reached her. She felt Ochako's hand on her arm and Todoroki's presence on her left, and Bakugo's specific energy on her right, the particular intensity of him when he was relieved and expressing it through being as physically present as possible without numbing the relief. She let herself be surrounded by all of it. She did not direct the stellar energy anywhere. She just let it exist. It was warm and steady and low, the specific output of someone who had nothing left to prove and nothing to manage, and was simply, entirely, completely present in a garden of her own making, surrounded by people who had chosen to stay. The debrief took 2 hours. She filed a 22-page report. Standard. Hawks was in the observation facility. He had been there as an external observer for the practical assessment, which had been the official reason for his presence at UA for visit number 8. She found him afterward in the hallway outside the debrief room. He looked at her with the expression she had spent 7 months building a reading of. "That was remarkable," he said. "The resonance redirect worked better than I projected," she said. "I have 6 pages of notes about the variants." "I know," he said. "I watched you write 2 of them during the debrief." She looked at him. He was leaning against the wall with the studied ease of someone who had decided something and was at peace with the decision. She had watched that peace develop over 7 months. She had watched him shift from the observer expression to the waiting expression to this one, the expression of someone who had waited long enough and was ready for whatever came next. She thought about what she had written in Notebook 24, not long-term, ongoing. She thought about what she had written in Notebook 28, about growing towards something. She thought about being 17, and about what came after 17, and about the specific shape of things that were seeds rather than fruit, and what it meant to tend them carefully. "I graduate in 3 months, she said. "I know," he said. "And then I start the internship track," she said, "and then the provisional license, and then the full license, and then—" "I know the timeline," he said. "I've been watching your trajectory for 7 months." "Watching it," she said. "From a respectful distance," he said, in a completely professional context. "With 8 visits," she said. 7 were official, he said. "And the 8th?" He looked at her, the expression was fully present now, no observer overlay, no assessment, just him. "The 8th, he said, was because I wanted to see how the year ended." She felt the stellar energy move in the direction it always moved when she was in proximity to something real. "How is it ending?" she said. "Better than I expected," he said, which was already high. She stood in the hallway in the aftermath of the most demanding thing she had ever done, and she felt, at full volume and in multiple directions simultaneously, and without a single managed edge, everything she felt. "I'm going to be very busy for the next 2 years, she said. "Licensing, internships, all of it." "I know," he said. "I might not have much time." "I have a high tolerance for irregular schedules," he said. "Comes with the job." She looked at him. She thought about tending. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He pushed off the wall. "Get some rest," he said. "You ran at full output for 4 minutes. Eat something, write your 6 pages about the resonance redirect." He started walking. "I'll be here." "You keep saying that," she said. He looked back. "I keep meaning it," he said. He walked out of the facility. She stood in the hallway for a moment. She added a page to Notebook 28 in her head. She would write it tonight. She would write seeds and patience and the specific kind of tending that does not rush because it trusts the growing. She put it away for later. She went to find the others. They were in the facility's common area. Ochako had acquired food from somewhere. She had a gift for acquiring food in any situation. It was a skill Izumi had catalogued in Notebook 12 and remained in awe of. Todoroki was making tea with the focused attention he gave everything. Bakugo was pretending not to be waiting for her by having a very intense conversation with a wall. She walked in. They all looked at her. The stellar energy around her was low and warm and steady. She was tired in the specific, comprehensive way of someone who had spent everything they had. She was also, underneath the exhaustion, entirely at peace. She sat down. 6 pages, Bakugo said without looking at her. That's all you're writing tonight, then you sleep. 7 pages, she said. There was a variance in the 3rd phase I need to document. 6 pages, he said, or I confiscate the notebook. She looked at Todoroki. He held out the tea without expression. She took it. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Ochako sat across from her with the expression that meant she had already processed everything, had filed it in the correct categories, and was at peace with all of it in the way that she had always been at peace with things about Izumi faster than anyone else. You were extraordinary, Ochako said simply. She thought about saying she had just done what the situation required. She thought about saying the coordination had been the critical factor, that without all of them, it would have been different. She thought about the various deflections she had spent 17 years perfecting. She said, thank you. Just that. Ochako smiled, the full one. You're learning, she said. Slowly, Izumi said. 27 notebooks, Ochako said. Working on notebook 29, she confirmed. Ochako raised her food in a small salute. They sat together in the facility common area, and the lights were warm, and the tea was warm, and outside the facility, the sky was doing something complicated with colors that she could see through the window. She thought about the garden. She thought about not knowing she had planted it. She thought about all the things she had made without realizing. The notebooks, the training, the 27 volumes of paying complete attention to the world around her, to the people in it, to the mechanisms of how things worked and why and what could be better. She had been making things for 9 years. She had not always known what she was making. She knew now. She knew the way she knew anything, completely, precisely, with the full volume of someone who felt everything at full volume and had stopped apologizing for the output. She opened notebook 29. She wrote, "This is what I have." She wrote, "People who chose to stay," a quirk that runs on authenticity, 9 years of training that was also 9 years of becoming, the specific knowledge that being fully yourself is not too much, that the people worth having do not ask you to manage yourself into something smaller. She wrote, "This is what I am." She wrote, "Someone who was told they were nothing and turned out to be a star." She looked at that. She kept it. She wrote, "Stars do not apologize for their light. They do not manage their output for the comfort of things that would rather have darkness. They burn. That is the whole of it. That is the thing and all the thing." She wrote, "I am done managing. I am done directing the light away from things that can hold it. I am done being smaller than I am." She wrote, "I am Izuku Midoriya. I have 29 notebooks and a quirk that runs on feeling everything completely, and people I love specifically and differently in all directions, and a garden I planted and forgot and came back to, and a future that is growing towards something I cannot fully see yet but can feel the warmth of from here." She wrote, "I am enough. I am everything. I am going to burn for a very long time." She closed the notebook. She looked up. The common area was warm. Ochako was laughing at something. Todoroki was doing the thing with his face that was not quite a smile, but was the architecture of one. Bakugo was arguing with the situation of having feelings by having them very loudly at the furniture. The stellar energy around her was low and steady and warm. Home. She let it be exactly as large as it was. Outside the facility window, the sky had settled into something that was neither day nor night, that specific threshold hour, the one between what had been and what was coming. She had always loved that hour. She sat in it, in the warmth, in the company of people who had seen her completely and stayed completely. She did not reach for the next notebook. She did not reach for the next analysis. She was 17 years old, and she had a crack in a bedroom ceiling from when she was 8, and a bent streetlight 3 blocks from her childhood home and 29 notebooks, and a garden she had made and forgotten and come back to. She had people. She had everything. The stellar energy settled around her like a small sun, deciding to rest for the evening. And in the threshold hour between what had been and what was coming, Izuku Midoriya, who had been told she was nothing and turned out to be a star, sat in the warmth of everything she had made and felt it all completely. Every single bit of it. At full volume. Without apology. Without management. Without end. The lights were warm. The stars were out. She burned. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching this full story from beginning to end. If you made it here, you are a real fiction Flux fan, and we see you. Comment what story you want next, subscribe, like, and share with every anime fan in your life. We will see you in the next one.